Welcome to the Queen's Bench podcast. Today, we're joined by an esteemed figure in business law, Professor Mohamed Khimji. Presently, he serves as the Associate Dean of Academic Policy at Queen's and also holds the position of Interim Dean of Graduate Studies. In these roles, he's instrumental in shaping the JD program at Queen's Law. Additionally, Professor Khimji is honored with the Distinguished David Allgood Professorship in Business Law and leads as the Director of the Queen's Business Law Program. His consultancy prowess is sought after by top-tier law firms and governmental agencies not just in Canada, but also in the US and the UK. With distinguished tenures at institutions like Western and Dalhousie, coupled with his practice experience at Toronto's Tory's LLP, Professor Khimji's impact on the legal arena is profound. We look forward to an engaging and insightful conversation ahead.
Before we jump in, please be sure to check out our website at queensbench.ca and follow us on all of your favorite social media and audio platforms. Now let's get started.
Tell us a little bit about how you ended up at Queen's from where it all began.
Well, that's a big question. So where it all began is Dar es Salaam, Tanzania. So that's where I was born and that's where I grew up and that's where I graduated from high school. And I could never have imagined that this is what my life would look like based on where I grew up and the circumstances in which I grew up. What I can say is my career trajectory has been full of surprises and full of delight. And what specifically would you like to know?
Well, so first of all, when did the dreams of law begin? Did it start in Tanzania or well after high school?
No, so I did law in England at the University of Bristol, and in England you can do law straight after high school.
Yeah.
And so I decided I wanted to do law when I was filling out my university application form.
Okay.
Did you fill out the application form while you were in Tanzania, or were you already in England at that time?
No, in Tanzania.
Okay.
So at least at the time, and I'm not sure if it's still like this, in England, if you wanted to go to university, there was a centralized application form where you chose 6 universities that you were applying to.
Okay.
And so I chose the 6 universities and I ended up at the University of Bristol.
Did you go to England on your own, or did you go with family or friends, or was it common for people to leave Tanzania to the UK?
I mean, it was common in the school that I went to. So I was very fortunate. I went to the international school.
Okay, yeah.
And so I went to school with people who were children of expats and children of diplomats. And so it was common for them to go to university in the US or in England or in their own home country, wherever that would be.
Yeah, makes sense. I had a similar experience because I was in Dubai. And when I lived in Dubai, it was very much like that, where if you went to the public school, you had less exposure to outside universities after you were done. But if you grew up in a different bubble of people who are like expats, going to private schools, international schools, there's a Canadian school, an American school, that kind of thing. And then in that bubble, it was extremely common. Almost all of my classmates ended up somewhere abroad after for their university education.
Was it the case that the majority of them went to university, or did some of them pursue other avenues?
From my international school, most of the students, most of the graduates ended up going to university.
Okay. And that was always your default?
I wouldn't say it was always my default. I mean, I'm actually the first person from my family to go to university.
Wow.
Okay. So it wasn't kind of expected of me. And I'll sort of explain a little bit in terms of my cultural context and my community context. So I'm part of a very small minority of Muslims that are based in East Africa, but I'm third generation Tanzanian. So originally, my great grandparents migrated from India to Tanzania, and a community of people from India did that.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so within my particular sect of Islam, we're a very small community. And sometimes what happens in very small communities is the cultural expectation, because there's a perceived threat of survival, like our community will die out. The pressure on young people is very much to marry young, marry within, and have lots of kids.
Yeah.
So that was kind of the cultural environment in which I was growing up in. And so the idea of going to university and becoming a professional of some sort, that very much was coming from the school I went to.
Okay.
Okay.
And I'm just a curious guy. I'm not one who conforms that easily.
Yeah.
I like doing my own thing, and so it makes sense now in hindsight that I would be attracted to something different and wanting to leave where I was born and try and make a life somewhere else.
Okay.
So go ahead.
So you decided to go to university, but like, was there a particular reason why you decided to pursue law, or was it just that you like? Was it more like hearing about it, or did you have an intrinsic reason?
That's a really good question. I mean, at the time that I decided to go to university and to apply, I didn't have a plan.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know enough.
Not very many of us do, because you don't know enough. That's exactly right.
That's right. And so you know, some of your listeners might be able to relate to this. If you come from there's something about Indian culture and Indian parents. There are only some legitimate areas of study.
Yeah.
And there's definitely a ranking. There's a hierarchy with medicine at the top.
Yeah. That's the apex predator of careers.
Absolutely. Like, whereas something like dramas is not acceptable. You can't do something like that.
Yeah.
So I kind of had limited choices.
It's the exact same in Middle Eastern culture.
And sadly, I also had limited abilities.
Mm-hmm.
When it came to science and maths and so law was sort of I can do this maybe.
Growing up, we asked Professor Pratt this too, were you an avid reader? Were you hyper curious and whatnot? Or did you sort of develop this interest in not just law, but some of the fundamental skills that accompany it, like reading later on?
I always liked reading fiction.
Okay.
I always liked reading fiction. And I wouldn't say, like, I was always a curious person, but at the time I decided to do law, before deciding to apply for law school, I wasn't particularly curious about law.
Yeah.
So I really didn't know that much. Like, I'd never heard the word tort before.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Did you, back in Tanzania, did you play sports growing up? Did you play soccer or anything like that?
I played tennis competitively.
You're kidding me.
No, I'm not.
Okay. Until how old?
Oh, it started to fall apart at puberty. So as a teenager, I wasn't as diligent in terms of practicing, and I became interested in other things. But I was actually 12 and under Tanzanian champion.
Wow.
Like number one?
No, I won a tournament.
Okay.
There was always I had this rival who was always ranked higher than me.
Did he go on?
That's good. It builds character.
Did you have dreams of playing in the ATP?
No, they died when I was really young.
But as a young kid, even, you had no dreams.
Oh, no, of course I did.
Okay.
Of course I did. That would have been nice, yeah.
Well, it's tough for a dream to die at 12 years old. Good grief.
Well, it really takes, like, I would play, ever since I was 5, I would play, I'm not kidding, 4 or 5 hours a day.
Yeah.
Wow.
And that just became very difficult to sustain.
Yeah.
I was very much the same. I played at U Ottawa, in fact, for about a year and a half before I started just training on my on my own.
Tennis?
Yes.
Oh,
and
I had no idea.
Unfortunately, COVID unraveled my aspirations, but because I simply got too old. I was the kids who I was competing against were, for the institution I wanted to play at, were 16 and 17 years old, and they were kicking my butt. So
yeah, I
realized I better make a career change, but I certainly sympathize with the rigor associated with it. But
sorry, you were asking me about my rival and what happened to him, and he ended up getting an NCAA scholarship.
Wow.
In the US. Yeah.
So, wow.
Well, so that's both big. Of you did very well.
Well, him in a different way.
Yeah, that's right.
Did he go on to play professionally?
Very briefly. Very briefly. Yeah, I mean that's a hard gig as well.
Yeah, no kidding.
No kidding. Okay, so let's I just want to get back on track. So you're in England, you're studying law. Can you just walk us through what happens after that and how you ended up here in the journey?
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. And so I get to England and I'm, fresh out of high school, doing first year, Prop C and all this stuff. And not knowing very much about even what was possible with a law degree. And so when you don't know what is possible, in a way that's easier because you're not really agonizing about your choices. You're kind of falling into what comes your way. And so I fell into this idea that I would become a transactional corporate lawyer, and I would go through the recruit, try and get a summer job after second year. And in England, they have an equivalent of articling called a training contract.
Okay.
And so I thought I would try that. And I wasn't particularly successful because I couldn't navigate the immigration rules. So at the time, I had a Tanzanian passport. And so not a work permit in England.
Yeah.
And the employers would tell me, oh, you need a work permit for us to make you an offer.
Wow. Okay.
And the immigration office would tell me, you need an offer for us to give you a work permit.
Mm.
And so I really wasn't sure how to deal with that. And I just decided, my sister was already in Canada. I have an older sister. And I thought, okay, well, Canada looks easier in terms of navigating the immigration. So I'm going to move to Canada. So I decided to come to Canada.
Okay, so it was an immigration incentive more than anything, it sounds like.
Well, that was certainly a big part of
Yeah.
it. That was a catalyst for sure.
Okay.
Was Canada the only option, or did you consider other places like Australia or the States or elsewhere?
I didn't. In my head, Canada was the only option. And it was also, I mean, when you're young, you're quite willing to take leaps of faith and
Yeah.
do
Yeah.
things you don't really know anything about. I didn't know what the move would turn out like.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But when you have a family member who's around, it comforts you, right? You think, well, if it
Definitely.
doesn't all work out, at least I can sleep on her floor. So
Yeah.
that was the idea.
Did she pursue law as well?
No, she didn't.
Okay.
No, she didn't.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then so describe how, well, first of all, the rigor associated with law school in England. It's a 5-year program, is it?
No, it's a 3-year program like
Okay.
Canada's is.
And they have articling just the same. Everything's pretty much standard.
I mean, my information might be out of date because this is, we're talking
okay.
20 plus years ago now. So at the time, at least, you did your 3-year law degree. And then their equivalent to a bar exam is a 1-year course.
Okay.
And then after that, you do a 2-year training contract.
Is that equivalent to articling?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's a longer apprenticeship
Yeah.
and professional exam period
But
that we
you
have in Canada.
But you save the time you spend in undergrad. So
That's right. Yeah.
probably convenient if nothing else. And then so how did you get to Tory's? Was Tory's the first place you worked at afterwards?
Yes. And that I think is one of my life's miracles, actually. So I show up in Canada and, I'm a foreign trained lawyer. I mean, that's what I am, even though I just have a law degree.
Yeah.
But that's how I'm treated by the law societies here. And so I have to apply for an assessment, which I do. I apply for an assessment where the law societies tell me what I need to do to be able to be called to the bar in Ontario. And so they assessed me 1.5 years of law school. And so I needed a law school in Ontario to let me do this 1.5 years.
Yeah.
And at the time, there were only 6 law schools in Ontario. And about a week before Labor Day weekend, 5 of them had not given me an offer.
Wow.
They'd rejected me. So there was one left. And that was the University of Windsor. And thankfully, a week before Labor Day, they sent me an offer letter and said I could do it. And so I lived in Windsor for a couple of years doing that. And
That's incredible.
yeah, they treated me really well. I thought they were very, very nice about it. They essentially treated me like I was a transfer student
Okay.
that had come in after 1L. So I was in 2L. That's how they treated me.
Yeah.
And that worked out super well because I got to participate in the very structured recruit.
Yeah.
And I didn't get a summer job, but I ended up getting an austling job. And at the time, the firms hired more 3Ls, if you see what I mean.
Yeah.
So, and I ended up getting really good grades. And that's, I think, why Tory's offered me a job. And I was very thrilled. I was pinching myself. Like I thought this was a really great thing to happen.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. I was also thinking along that makes a lot more sense because outside of the formal recruit for a foreign trained lawyer, I've heard it's like super difficult to break into, especially that niche. So it makes sense that you went through some sort of formal recruit to get there.
Yes, it is very, very difficult. I mean, at least at the entry level.
Yeah.
It's very difficult.
So you mentioned that they were taking more 3Ls instead of 2Ls back then. Do you know when that changed?
I don't remember the year precisely, but at some point during my teaching career, they started doing OCIs, and the sort of summer recruit became the bigger recruit.
And is the thought process behind that, let's get the students earlier on so that we could develop them better for when they do start articling? Is that the thought process?
That might be partly it, but my understanding is it's mainly they want the best students as soon as possible.
Okay.
It's a market, right? It's a competition to get the best students that are available. And if one firm begins to recruit earlier, then they all have to.
Yeah.
That's just kind of that's my understanding of it. It's really about the firms trying to get the best students as soon as possible.
Yeah. And then how long were you at Tory's before you transitioned to academia?
That's really a miracle, I think. I mean, so during my articles, it was very different to what I imagined it to be. And I'm not sure I really imagined it to be anything. I had no idea what working as a low-level transactional lawyer would be like. And I remember doing it and starting it and thinking to myself, okay, this is great and really interesting and the people are really smart. But I don't think I want my life to look like this forever.
Yeah.
I kind of decided that, and I thought, oh, it'd be nice to work at a university. And I'd seen, academics teach me. They wrote papers, they wrote books. Oh, isn't that a civilized way to live? Like that seems really cool. And so that means I'm going to have to go to graduate school. I'm probably going to have to do a PhD. But let me at least start with graduate school. So, after articling, I asked for a leave of absence to go do an LLM for 1 year. And firms are generally willing to give you a 1 year leave of absence. They're not going to give you a 5 year leave of absence to do a PhD, but they'll give you a 1 year leave of absence to do a master's. And so I ended up going back to England to the London School of Economics. And again, kind of not really knowing what it is I needed to do to position myself to be an academic. So now the good thing about England is the universities tend to give every student what's known as a personal tutor.
Oh, wow.
So you're assigned a faculty member who's your personal tutor, who you can go to, ask questions. You have a relationship with someone going in.
Yeah.
And so I went to my personal tutor and I asked her, I said, look, I want to be an academic like you. That I want to be you. So tell me what I need to do. Because I have no idea. And I'll never forget her answer. Her answer was publish, publish, publish. Yeah. That was her answer. And I said, okay, that's great. So I'm going to have to write something and publish it, but I have no idea what to write about. And I literally didn't. I had no topic when I was in England starting this master's program. And she gave me some really good advice. She said to me, look, there are all these courses here that are seminar courses. This is before the ad drop period is over. Go to the first class of all the ones you can and see if you get inspired by something. And so that's what I did. I decided to go to all these classes to see if something would inspire me, give me a topic to write about.
That is clever.
Yeah, it was really good advice. It was brilliant. And so I ended up discovering through this one class called Interests in Securities that the property law regime, as it applied to financial assets, wasn't so robust. And sort of changes in how financial assets were held, in terms of how they were intermediated and held electronically through brokers and so on, we needed to rethink how property law applied to those assets.
Yeah.
And so I thought, okay, that seems interesting enough. I was a young, confident guy at the time. I thought, I can come up with something clever and fix this problem. And so, I spent a couple of nights thinking about some conceptual solution to this problem. And I went to see the teacher of the course, and I said, look, I've got this idea for a paper, for a thesis. Here's an outline. And she sort of looked at me. She was sort of suspicious when I first walked in and started talking really confidently. But then she read my outline and she said, okay, I'll supervise you. Yeah. And so that's how that relationship began. And that was another great relationship I had. And I ended up writing a thesis that I published in a reasonably good journal in England, the Journal of Business Law. And so I did that. And then I went back to Tory's to be a first-year associate.
Okay.
And while I was a first-year associate, Dalhousie offered me a job.
Wow.
as a tenure track academic at the law school.
Wow.
And I couldn't say no.
Yeah.
I couldn't say no because I thought, oh, if I say no here, I'll eventually, if I want to do this, I'll have to do a PhD. I may not get anything anyway, even after doing the PhD.
Yeah.
I'm likely never going to leave practice and do a PhD because it's just not a sensible thing to do.
Yeah.
And so, I took off to Halifax, Nova Scotia, to be an academic.
Before we go out east, did you go back to England because you missed it? Like, was there anything very appealing to you about the living situation in England, or was it just the most convenient of the options you had available to you?
That's a really good question. Why did I go back to England? And I'm not entirely sure I really thought about it that much. I think part of it was, because I made this decision during articling, I was a little bit late in the game. I didn't apply to graduate school early.
Yeah.
And so England was familiar.
Okay.
And so I thought, well, let me do that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then the mentor that you had, would you say you have maintained a relationship with her, or was that sort of in the past more now than anything else?
For a little while over the years. I mean, like that was a really good, like that one paper I wrote, that thesis, like it gave me a lot in life. It really, really did. I mean,
Really paid off.
it really paid off. I mean,
Yeah.
so like the Bank of England had set up a committee to think about legislation in this area. They hired me as a research assistant. The Law Commission of England and Wales consulted me on this issue.
Wow. So you were getting a lot of consulting opportunities from it.
A little bit, yeah. Like a lot of, some attention. Yeah, people were interested in what I had to say.
It
Yeah.
sounds like you were right to be cocky. It sounds like you've solved the problem.
No. Actually, I hadn't. What's interesting is my particular way of looking at it didn't become the accepted way.
Okay.
It was just a way.
Okay.
Yeah, it hadn't become the accepted way. It never became the accepted way. So, and that's
enough.
okay. But no, I was just, that one article just gave me a lot of credibility I don't even think I deserved at the time. But and it led to my academic job, which I'm very grateful for.
So you would generally encourage students to pursue publication?
If you want to be an academic, you absolutely have to. And I highly recommend doing it early on. It's very common these days for schools in Canada and even England to insist on a PhD at law schools. But in America, they don't.
Yeah.
Like American law schools don't insist on even a master's degree. They really care about research potential. And you that's a really reliable way to demonstrate research potential is through publication.
Okay. You're out east, you're working at Dalhousie. How long are you there, and what are you doing specifically? What are you teaching?
Yes, at Dalhousie. I mean, that's a very fun time in my life. So I get to Dalhousie and I'll just tell a funny story. Can I tell a funny story about Dalhousie
Please,
and
go ahead.
maritime culture? It was all new to me, but it was also charming. And so, at this time in my life, I don't own very much. And because I'm so excited about getting an offer, I don't negotiate the offer, right? So Dalhousie offered me a job. I just accepted it. I didn't negotiate it. And so they'd given me, in terms of my offer, they offered to cover 80% of my moving expenses. And so I accepted that, but I didn't own very much. And so I moved out there, and I went to the finance office to submit my receipts and my claim. And the finance manager looks it over, and she looks at me and she goes, "That's it?" And I said, "Yeah, I don't own very much stuff." So, and she says, "Look, I'm going to give you 100%." and I thought that was brilliant. A really great start, really, really positive, and that's maritime culture for you.
Yeah.
I can't imagine that happening in Ontario ever.
Well, you can't get more lucky if you're on a plane than getting seated beside someone from out east, because they'll become your best friend in less than an hour. So that's certainly true. What were you teaching at Dalhousie?
So at Dalhousie, I was teaching business associations, sale of goods, secured transactions, and I was the coach for the corporate securities law moot. That was my first year. Yeah.
So these were all subjects you were well acquainted with because of your time in practice at Tory's?
I mean, I well acquainted is a stretch.
Okay.
Right? Well acquainted is a stretch. I mean, if you've never taught a course before, you're really just surviving week to week.
Okay.
Think about it this way. Like if you're preparing a 2-hour class for the first time, it's going to take you at least 10 hours.
Okay. And then the skills associated with with teaching. I was curious to hear what Pratt said about this as well. He said he wasn't necessarily the most comfortable public speaker naturally, which was surprising to me because he comes across that way in class. Would you say you always were a natural public speaker, or was it something you had to learn?
It was something I probably should have thought about more. I'm an introvert. Like I'm very much an introvert, and academia appealed to me more because I wanted to write and think about problems.
Yeah.
The teaching was an afterthought, and that's no. I love my students. That's no disrespect to my students, but going in, the teaching was very much an afterthought.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember going into my first business associations class. I was so nervous that I thought I was going to die. I really did. I thought I was going to die because just the idea of going up there and talking in front of 60 people, and that was the cap at Dalhousie, 60 people in business associations. I mean, I didn't last more than 5 minutes in that first class. I literally just gave them the syllabus, said welcome, and that was it. You know, and it was. Anyway, as you can see, I made it. I did not die. I'm here.
Was it just the exposure that got you comfortable with it? Did you do lessons anywhere, or was it just something that came up like naturally, eventually?
No, I mean, what happened was I decided that I needed to create some persona. Like I needed to treat it like acting.
Yeah.
Right? I was giving a performance.
Yeah.
And that's what helped me get through it. This wasn't me doing it. I was going in and I was delivering a performance.
That is so cool.
That's a good way to think about it.
That's really, really cool. You still engage with many practitioners, don't you? Like, I imagine you kept a pretty good network in Toronto with both your days working there, and I imagine you're doing still some consulting potentially.
I don't do any consulting. I don't
Okay.
have a side gig or anything
Okay.
like that. I still have good relationships at Tory's, and especially with our alumni.
Yeah.
And, I've taught now, this is my 20th year of teaching. I mean, I have former students who are now partners and so on.
That's
and so
cool.
I have good relationships with them. To the extent that I interact with practice, I've been lucky enough to be asked to be retained as an expert witness in litigation.
Cool.
And that's been a lot of fun. I mean, it's only happened 3 times,
Yeah.
but all by a U.S. law firm.
Wow.
In litigation, like in Delaware and New York and Colorado.
That's incredible. The other thing I'm curious about, because you've been at so many different schools in Canada and even internationally, how would you compare the educational experience? Is there anything that stands out about, maybe I'll point more to the international side of things. Is there anything that stands out from how they do law school in England versus how they do it here?
That's a good question. That's a good question. I mean, I think, and I have kind of a couple of things I want to say in response to this. One is I went to law school at a very different time to you guys. I mean, this is over 2 decades ago, right? So I went to law school at a very different time. And to give you an idea, when I went to university in England, university was free for English people.
Okay.
There was no tuition. And the government even gave most people a grant to go to university. So you were paid to go to university.
Wow.
So it's a different time.
Yeah.
It was also a different time in terms of what students expected.
Yeah.
So another example I'll give you is, so I wrote exams. They were all closed book. And no student would get any feedback ever.
Yeah.
You just weren't allowed to see your exam or even question your mark.
Wow. Okay.
So it's just a different culture.
Shift.
Yeah, it's a different culture, different time. My reading lists on a week-to-week basis had textbook extracts, casebook extracts, actual cases, articles from journals, and law reform reports if applicable. And the expectation was I would just read as much as I possibly could to prepare.
So what you mean to say is we've gone a little bit soft.
Well, I don't know if soft is the right way of putting it. I think students have more expectations now, but that actually doesn't surprise me. given how much you guys have to pay for education.
Yeah.
It strikes me as a very reasonable exchange. Like, I'm paying more, which means I demand more in terms of accountability and service and so on.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so that's another point I'll make, just to give you sort of a comparison. So at Queen's, the tuition fee is about $20,000 a year, Canadian. So I visited Yale Law School, and the tuition fee at Yale Law School is about $70,000 US.
Wow.
And I've also visited the University of Valencia in Spain. At the time I visited it, the tuition fee was €300.
Wow.
Wow.
So, and you really see it when you're there because, in terms of what Yale offers.
Yeah.
The events, the food at the events.
Oh, really?
Yeah. I mean, and like the career development office at Yale Law School has a dedicated person to help students find public service opportunities.
Wow.
Whereas by contrast, the University of Valencia doesn't even have a career development office.
Okay.
So that kind of the economic reality based on tuition fee and how it's related to tuition fee, I've been able to see, and that's been interesting.
So you would say you think you more or less get what you pay for?
I think that's right. Yeah, I think that's right. And it's also made me think that maybe we need more variety in terms of like a bespoke.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like students. It's actually students that should be demanding this. Like, I'm willing to pay for X, Y, and Z. Like, it's like when you buy a car and you choose your options.
Yeah.
I think maybe that might be a good model because I don't see the trajectory being sustainable in terms of how much things cost.
Yeah.
Definitely. Across the board, I would say, yeah.
You detail how it's changed tremendously. Obviously, technology has developed considerably, even in the past 5 years. Most recently with AI, you just wrote an article for Queen's to that effect. How do you see AI influencing? We'll start first with academia, and then we'll talk a little bit about practice later.
Yeah, so AI, I mean, that's a really big thing that everybody's thinking about right now in terms of how it's going to change the world. And people are saying lots of things, and I'm more of a cautious person. I can't predict the future. Nobody can.
Yeah.
But in terms of sort of how my take on it is, I'm one of those people that is very receptive to change, and I believe innovation is a good thing.
Yeah.
We need constant innovation. That should be happening, and I see this as an example of innovation that we should embrace as a law school. And so I think the article, I didn't write the article. I think I was just interviewed for an article in the Queen's Law Reports. And so I made the point that, as a law school, we've taken the position that, we don't have a default rule. In fact, our default rule is permissive. Students can use AI for learning purposes, and we don't have a problem with that. Like, we're not going to discourage them from doing that.
Yeah.
And that belief comes from this idea that students should be literate in using this technology. Where we have sort of adopted a mandatory rule is you obviously can't use the work of generative AI and present it as your own.
Yeah.
Because that's the equivalent of plagiarism, and we certainly don't want to allow that.
No, of course not. And
so,
in practice, have you heard anything about the approach that they're taking with AI in practice?
I have. I've read a little bit, and I've spoken to people, and different firms appear to be doing different things. Some appear to be discouraging the use of AI. Others are trying to develop their own customized AI platforms that they use. And so it really it ranges between those two extremes. What firms need to worry about, and what I encourage my students to worry about, is not just the academic integrity piece, and that of course is important, but there's also a quality control element.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, generative AI, as we know, is not very good with dealing with hypothetical fact situations. It also tends to make stuff up.
Yeah.
And so for anyone using it, it's really, really important to verify the product using primary source material.
Yeah.
And so lawyers still need to have the same skills that we've always been teaching them, at least partly to verify the accuracy and quality of what AI will generate.
Yeah. you would think generally, though, you're sort of in favor of it. It's almost relates to the conversation we had off camera, where if one firm does it, the others sort of have to, because certainly if a practice is advantageous. Presumably, as AI develops, it will offer a considerable advantage where essentially it becomes inevitable. Would you agree with that?
My educated guess would be yes. I mean, what I suspect will happen is generative AI will become more and more reliable.
Yeah.
It'll get better, as the iPhone has gotten better over the years, right? So it'll just get better. It'll get more reliable.
Definitely, I think, yeah.
And so what people will be able to do things faster and cheaper, right? So you'll be able to do more in less time and of sufficiently good quality.
Yeah.
And I don't see that as threatening. I see that as a positive.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, even for this podcast, it's been tremendously useful. You could speak more to that, but
yeah, I mean, you can get all kinds of AI tools. I mean, it's just been like in the past couple of years, really, like it went from hardly any to all kinds. And I think we're very much in an infant stage where everybody has their own bespoke AI model charging a monthly fee. So if you're going to use it like day in, day out, I'm noticing like you're paying for 6 or 7 services. Each of them are $20 a month. It adds up. But I think it's only a matter of time before you get some big company that comes in and offers like a broader kind of like service model with different AI tools. And like, I mean, Adobe Creative Cloud now is incorporating it. So whereas previously I was editing audio with a tool and editing the video with another tool and doing the color correction with an AI and whatnot, now it's like it's all in Creative Cloud. So I think it's just going to become everywhere. And Microsoft's going to add it to Word. So there you go. You can't even avoid it in the future, I don't think.
You make a good point, though, too. It's strikingly affordable. I mean, Westlaw and Lexis aren't particularly cheap, you know?
That's true.
So a $30 per month subscription, which is going to increase efficiency, who knows how many fold, might be more than worth it, you know? So,
and that's what I fear from my perspective is like, I'm very blessed to have exposure to this older in life, like when I'm older. So at least I know how to write stuff on my own, and I know how to read legal cases on my own. So I can fact check it, like you said. But I worry about future generations, and if they grow up with it hardly ever making a mistake, right? They're just going to learn to trust it. And just like we forget how to do division because we have calculators, I think a lot, like it is something that people need to be mindful of going forward, that kids might not learn how to write full paragraphs on their own very well.
In fact, we have seen the unfortunate effect of that in a small way already. For the past 100 years, IQ had been consistently going up. And it was last year that an article came out that it was the first year that they recorded it actually took a little dip.
Wow, I didn't even know about that.
So the fear is if we have so many useful tools, maybe the skills required to do basic things just will never be learned. And maybe it could in the long run be to our detriment, not benefit. But certainly in the short term, I could see it increasing efficiency tremendously.
Yeah, I agree.
It's also still in its infancy, I understand. I think AI in the next even 5 years will more than double in terms of its effect, you know?
Yeah.
So, which leads to the point, do you think that ultimately lawyers ought to be concerned for their jobs? Do you think it's going to replace lawyers?
I don't think so. I don't think so. I think there will always be a need for human judgment.
Yeah.
And that's where lawyers can come in. And I think what I suspect will happen is lawyers who can use AI to generate efficiencies will be more valuable than lawyers who cannot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you ever think of, and I think about this myself all the time, because it seems that in some ways we've made huge strides in education, and in other ways we're still stuck in this model where everything has to be evaluated and in a 3-hour exam. And I'm finding, for example, this year that a lot of my professors are giving us take-home exams, recognizing that, you know, you might not be feeling well that day, or you might be off, or maybe you're just not the kind of person that can analyze a whole fact pattern in an hour and a half, right? And sometimes that pays off in work. Like, you know, if you work in a different setting, you might have a day to look at an issue, and maybe you'll come up with a better problem, or better solution. And so do you have any ideas about alternative testing methodologies or ways that in the future you can kind of mitigate that kind of stuff other than a take-home exam?
That's a very, very difficult question and a good question. How do you assess people in a reliable way?
Yeah.
And it really depends on what you think the purpose of assessments is. And that's a key question that no teacher should ever forget. Like, what's the purpose of assessments?
Mm-hmm.
And so one obvious purpose is so people get feedback on how to improve. Right? That's one obvious purpose of assessments. The other purpose, though, and it is an important purpose, is to signal to employers who are above average performers, who are average performers, and who are below average performers.
Yeah.
And sort of those two things almost don't work well together, because to be reliable as a signal to employers, you kind of need everyone to do the same thing. You can't give everyone different methods of assessment, because then it becomes difficult to compare.
Right.
Yeah.
You can't compare as reliably as if you can compare very reliably if you give everyone a 3-hour exam.
Yeah.
And I don't think no firm will ever say this, but I suspect one reason why they like to hire out of 1L is because everybody's taking the same courses.
Yeah.
It becomes much easier to compare. Once people are taking different courses, they're writing papers, they're writing, they're doing assignments and quizzes and so on, it just becomes really difficult for an employer to compare.
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense, actually.
As the associate dean then of academic policy, is any part of your job maintaining the integrity of the curves here at Queen's? Like making sure they're as meaningful now as they might have been when everything was standardized, when there was no alternative option to the 3-hour exam, when there was no open book exam?
Well, one of our fundamental principles is academic freedom, and we these days encourage instructors to employ multiple methods of assessment. We definitely encourage it because we believe that has pedagogical value.
Yeah.
And the observation I was making a second ago was really about how employers respond to that.
Mm-hmm.
And I suspect they'll never say it. This is just me. I suspect part of the reason why they began shifting to recruiting from 1L is because that's really reliable if 1L looks similar across every law school.
Yeah. So as the associate dean, you do play a role now in shaping the direction of Queen's, particularly as it pertains to business here, like you mentioned, but to business law, the pursuit of business law. But would you say that your experiences in the past, both at other schools and even as a student, have informed the way you want to shape life as a Queen's Law student and the direction that Queen's Law takes? And if so, how?
Oh, absolutely. And that's a really good question. And we never got to this, but you had asked me, why did I become an associate dean? And I mean, the simple answer is, my dean at the time, Mark Walters, asked me. And so I said yes. And I've really enjoyed it so far. I mean, I'm only in my second year of it, and you get to make a positive contribution in a different way. So one initiative that I'm working on as the associate dean of academic policy is I want to establish a first-generation alumni match program.
Okay.
Right, so I mentioned
really
earlier
cool.
that I was the first person from my family to go to university, and from that lived experience, I know that as a first-generation student, you don't really have a network.
Yeah.
You don't have advice, and you don't have information.
That's right.
And so the idea of the alumni match program, the first generation alumni match program, would be to give that to our first generation students.
Yeah.
And that's a really meaningful kind of initiative to be working on. And I get to work with the CDO and our director of Indigenous Initiatives and EDII on something like that, which is a lot of fun and really meaningful. And then at the graduate, as an interim associate dean, graduate studies, what I've observed, I've only been doing this for 3 months, and I'm one of those people that can't help but try and make things better. And so what I've observed is graduate students have different goals, right? There are different types of graduate students. Some are doing an LLM because they see it as an enhancement to their professional qualifications.
Yeah.
Others are doing it because they're foreign trained lawyers and they've come to Canada and they want to establish a network and connections and they want some familiarity with Canadian law and so on. And then there are others who want to pursue a research career.
Yep.
And they're all completely different. They have different needs. And so I'm thinking about how to restructure our graduate programs so that we meet the needs of these three demographics, as opposed to having... We right now almost treat our graduate students as if they all want to be academics, and they don't. That's not what they all want.
Yeah.
And so why not give them what they want?
Yeah.
And help them achieve their goals. And that's actually the most meaningful thing, I think. You're helping people achieve their goals by changing the structure of an organization.
Yeah.
And I really enjoy that.
So you've talked about what you like about it. What's the hardest part about being an associate dean?
What's the hardest part about being an associate dean? I mean, it hasn't been that hard for me so far. It really hasn't. I
That's
find,
a good thing.
And of course, you're a sounding board for many people.
Yeah.
Right? Like people will complain to you. They'll tell you you haven't done things properly.
Yeah.
They'll tell you you're not giving enough attention to their specific issue. But I find it doesn't really faze me, and I find I just roll with the punches, and I have really thick skin. I'm old. I don't really care what people think of me anymore. And I just try and be reasonable and fair and principled, and as long as I'm okay with how I'm doing things, I find it's fine.
Have you always been thick-skinned, or is that something you sort of grew into as well?
That's hard to say objectively. I mean, I think as a young person, you're naturally more inclined to care about, being cool or whatever, right? Like you care.
It does seem like you were always very self-assured.
Maybe. It's hard to say. Maybe.
Yeah.
Because when you're a kid, you just are how you are, and that's normal.
Yeah.
You don't really think about it.
Yeah.
I also think it's on a individual basis. Like everybody cares less when they're older, but some people inherently care more always. So it's a gradient, right?
Yes, that's exactly right.
Yeah.
I mean, I certainly know people who I've grown up with who still care deeply.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
So in terms of your role as Associate Dean, Academic Policy again, do you inform about Queen's admissions at all?
I'm not that involved with our admissions team in terms of the operations, but that's sort of one of the teams I'm interested in, for sure.
Okay, and how would you say, again, I remember reading an LSAC article back when I was doing the LSAT, after I had written the LSAT. And at the time, it was reported that on average, people taking the LSAT had studied for significantly more hours and had generally achieved higher scores than otherwise would have been predicted. Have you seen that high standard that was established during COVID persist?
That's a really good question. And that's COVID was really, really interesting in terms of what happened.
Yeah.
And I don't think it was just COVID. I think part of it was also just what was going on socially at the time with the murder of George Floyd and the protests, and there developed more of an interest in law and law schools and how it could
That's a great point.
Make society better.
I didn't even think of that, but that's brilliant. Yeah.
Even, I suppose it gave many people who were forced to work from home or otherwise a chance to reconsider what they wanted to do. And it sort of speaks again to the career transition point again. It sort of allowed people to take a step back and reconsider what they wanted to do.
That's exactly right. And I'm sure you read in the article that in 2021, a record number of people took the LSAT.
Exactly.
And the scores were really high at law schools across North America.
Yeah.
In terms of their admission standards.
Yeah.
And we experienced this too. But now they're back to historical normal levels.
So you don't see a huge discrepancy year to year?
No.
It was sort of like a blip, you would say.
It was a blip, at least so far. Yes, it seems that way.
Interesting.
But 2021 was only 2 years ago.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So in terms of your career, when you take a step back and look at that, you spoke a little bit about at the micro level what you enjoyed about each thing. What would you say were your career highlights? And it doesn't sound like you've had a whole lot of lowlights, but if you want to throw one of those in there, by all means.
Oh, career highlights. That's so. There are so many that it's really hard. Like I mentioned, the business law program and the success of our students in 2021.
That is huge.
Yeah, and just the little small victories along the way. I always enjoy a small victory.
Yeah,
you have to. So career highlights. I mean, that's a good question. Yes, the example I'll give is the first time I was asked to be an expert witness in litigation. So this was by a New York law firm with the litigation in Delaware. And often litigation matters will settle, right? There'll never be a trial. But with this one, there was a trial. The whole experience was really funny and really great. And so when I was deposed, right? So there was a deposition, and so I was grilled for about 5 hours.
Wow.
By a group of opposing counsel, which I just wasn't ready for. and you know this because you've been told it, but I've never been a litigator.
Yeah.
And so I didn't realize that the entire 5 hours would be all about undermining my credibility and making me look dumb. And so I found that experience really shocking.
Yeah.
And I felt really bad afterwards that I wasn't prepared and I hadn't done a good job. But anyway, I got to redeem myself at the trial. And the other thing I realized at the trial was people behave better when a judge is present.
Yeah.
They're not as nasty.
Interesting.
So that was really interesting. So it was a really funny moment during the cross-examination where the lawyer was giving me this complicated hypothetical and telling me and asking me if my analysis would change with his new hypothetical. And just the way that his hypothetical had been set out, it just wasn't possible for that to happen. I don't want to give you the details because it's too boring.
Yeah.
But I'm sort of trying to follow along, sitting on the stand and realizing that, this hypothetical is not even possible. Like, it can't happen this way. And so I kept saying in my answer to the question, your question doesn't make any sense. And I'm not going to answer it.
Yeah.
So as a witness, I was, just saying I'm not going to answer the question, basically. And eventually I got it. We kept going back and forth like this, and eventually I just turned around and I said to the judge, Your Honor, his question doesn't make any sense. Do I have to answer it? And what I didn't realize was, as a witness, you're not allowed to speak to the judge.
Oh.
You're not allowed.
In Canada too?
I don't know in Canada. I've never been a litigator. I have no idea what the rules of court are.
Yeah.
So the judge looked really sort of frightened, like, oh, the witness is talking to me. And so the judge looked at the lawyer, my lawyer, who'd retained me, who immediately stood up and said, objection, which in itself is quite funny.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then the judge was also very funny and said, oh, let me guess, this is a question. This is an objection based on a question that doesn't make any sense. And everybody laughed, and then the best part happened is he looked at the cross-examiner and he said, look, I know where you're trying to get the witness to go, but even if you could get him there, it won't help you. So I'm going to allow the objection. And I thought that was like a TV show moment. It was really, really good. I enjoyed that. Yeah.
You spoke at the start about the sort of the cultural dynamic and in terms of expectations of potential career paths that you could consider. Obviously, you've had a very successful career. Do you still have contacts back in Tanzania? Do you still have family there? And do you know what their thoughts are about your career as a lawyer?
Oh, that's a good question. I mean, so, my father had 14 siblings.
Wow.
And my mother 6.
Okay.
And so I have a lot of aunts, uncles, and cousins.
Wow, yeah.
Lots and lots of them. And we're sort of all over the world now, but definitely some in Tanzania still. I would say, I mean, you'd have to ask, my extended family themselves what they think. But I would guess that they're a little bit surprised and they're not entirely sure what this is about, really. Yeah. So, yeah.
Where did most of your family end up going? You said many of them went around the world, did any of the rest of them come to Canada, or was there a preferred location?
I would say there was a preferred location. So in Canada, I definitely have cousins. My sister is here. My nephews are here. I have some in Dubai,
Interesting.
some in England, some in Uganda, some in Kenya.
Wow. So do you still do you get to travel at all?
Well, I would say I traveled more before I had children.
Yeah.
And so, and I had children, and the pandemic sort of killed travel for a bit, and I haven't, that hasn't revived for me at least. The travel.
It's a great segue. Detail. Well, so what are some of your hobbies? What do you like to do in your free time?
What do I like to do in my free time? I mean, that's changed over the years depending on my life stage. But right now, I would say I like to play tennis still a lot. I'm not as good as I used to be, but I enjoy it. Like it's a lot of fun. Like I love doing it, and I like cooking.
Okay,
a lot.
Traditional Tanzanian food or everything? Are you an expert in French cuisine? What do you cook?
Oh, I wouldn't say I'm an expert at anything. I wouldn't say I'm an expert at anything. So, so over the years, my repertoire has expanded, and I've been a little bit whimsical. Like I guess that's where I get to express my whimsical side. As I'll cook X today.
Yeah,
and so over the years, like I went through this period where I was making Sichuan food a lot.
Wow,
for whatever reason, like I just decided that that's what I wanted to do.
Yeah,
I still have somewhat of a Sichuanese pantry with the stuff. So I mean, so last night I made peposo, which is an Italian beef stew. So it just varies a lot, but I enjoy doing it, and I especially enjoy doing it for my kids.
Yeah,
like I'm a big believer in nutrition, and they should be getting certain things, and I'll make their school lunches, and so on. Yeah.
So you're not afraid to experiment. You'll try pretty much everything.
I personally, yes. But that's another thing where, with kids, it changes, right? Because they tend to not like change.
No.
They tend not to want to experiment. And so, I've become more like a line cook.
Yeah. Okay.
Where I really just try and do the same thing all the time because I really just want them to eat.
I would be remiss not to ask, because you're a tennis guy, but in the Djokovic-Nadal-Federer debate, do you fall on one side, or do you just recognize great tennis and leave it at that?
Oh, that's hard. I mean, that's hard. I mean, I don't actually watch that much tennis anymore. I used to as a kid, where it was Borg, McEnroe, and Connors.
Okay.
And I was a Jimmy Connors guy.
Okay.
So,
do you have a preferred court? Do you prefer hard court, grass court, clay court?
Now that I'm a middle-aged man, I prefer clay court.
Okay. Softer on the knees.
Softer on the knees, absolutely.
Would you say fitness is generally a part of your daily routine?
Yes, as much as possible. I mean, if I'm not playing tennis, then I like to go to the gym.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So do you play tennis weekly, like frequently?
In the summers, I try to. Yeah.
Okay.
In the summers, I try to. I mean, I don't have a membership at a club with a bubble.
Yeah.
So it's very much a summer thing for me.
Yeah. I was encouraged in my OCIs recently, because fitness is a big part of how I deal with stress even. And I was encouraged, many of the lawyers I spoke to essentially reassured me that they still do find time to engage with that. And hearing that coming from you too, who I know you're incredibly busy, it is reassuring that you're still able to do some of the things that you like. Even in your professional career.
You have to prioritize it though.
Yeah.
Like you have to sort of allocate time to it. I mean, what you'll find as you sort of progress in your career and have more being asked of you, is you really need a good calendar on your phone.
Yeah.
Very reliable one.
I'm learning that this year.
Yeah.
Would you say that there is considerably better work-life balance in your current career than there was as a practitioner?
Yes, and that's by definition. I mean, academia, one of the sort of real appeals of academia, once you really understand what it is that, other than your teaching and meeting schedule, your research work can be done whenever you want it to be done.
Yeah.
And that's a real that facilitates more of a work-life balance, whereas private practice is very much client-driven. And they dictate the schedule of things.
Yeah.
And that's just how it is. Like you have to deal with that.
I can see you're wearing the Taylor Swift shirt, and you were telling us a little bit about that you've been known as a Swifty. Where did that start? How did that come about? And is it true?
It is absolutely true. I'm a Swifty. Yeah, it's true. And so how did that begin? So Taylor Swift, I didn't really know much about her until she released a couple of albums in 2020 that were folky.
Yeah.
That were folky. And she collaborated with Bon Iver on the first one, which I believe was called Folklore. And Bon Iver is the kind of stuff I would listen to, sad boy indie. That's really what I listen to. And I just thought it was interesting that she was collaborating with Justin Vernon. I thought that was interesting, and so I listened to the song. Like I remember listening to that for the first time and thinking, "This is really good." Yeah. And so I listened to the whole album, Folklore, and I thought it was really quite good. And
then you were bit by the bug.
So I discovered Taylor Swift during that folk period in 2020. So I didn't even know at the time that she began as a Nashville country singer-songwriter. And from Pennsylvania, no less. Like I didn't know any of this.
Mm-hmm.
But that makes her more interesting.
Yeah.
That she could make these transitions that are quite significant and do them all quite well.
Do you like country music?
I don't particularly, but I do enjoy her older stuff
country
now
music.
as well. And I'm not entirely sure when the country phase ended. Like, did it end with Red? Is that when it ended?
Sort of. Yeah, a little bit.
Okay. So, yeah.
So granted, you're certainly more familiar with her than I am now, certainly. So
I feel very underqualified here.
Just in terms of, so I enjoy the music, but I also find her intellectually quite interesting. And she's done something that I didn't think was possible in this day and age, right? Like music right now is very fragmented. Mm-hmm. Access to music is really easy and cheap. So people listen to different things.
Yeah.
Right.
Whereas when I was a kid, I'd go to a friend's house with a tape that I'd made myself, and I'd say, "Oh, listen to this, it's amazing." And we'd sit in my friend's room and listen to this together. Like that's how it worked. And music was a sense of making connections with people and building relationships, which I think we've lost through streaming and online music, where everyone's just on their headphones listening to music by themselves.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Whereas Taylor Swift is really a way of bonding with people, which I find incredible. Like in England, there are these club nights called Swiftageddon that I'd love to go to. Like it's a bit far, unfortunately. But so at these these club nights, people will go and the DJ will only play Taylor Swift.
Yeah, that's hilarious.
And they're always sold out.
Well, and
that's
her fan base recently has grown even bigger. I'm a big football fan, and she's recently started dating Travis Kelce. So reasonable minds can disagree on if she's making it better or taking away from the game, but because you're watching the broadcast, and half the time, honest to goodness, I think they count about 25 shots during a game where it's just her. It's not even on the game. So her reach is incredibly expansive. It's striking.
That's absolutely right. And so, when I first discovered how big a deal she was after listening to her music, that was something that I wanted to understand. Like, what is it about her?
Yeah.
But she just has something. Like, when she's talking, I've never seen her in person, but if I'm watching an interview, if she is speaking, I have to listen. And if she is smiling, I smile back. But that's how it is. Like she has that, and I'm clearly not the only one she has that effect on.
No, not at all. Far from it.
Sounds like I need to pay more attention to her.
Once you start, you won't be able to stop.
It's like golf. So for anyone basically who's made it this far, we'll give them an opportunity here. How do you take your coffee for any keeners in your property class right now?
Oh, I take my coffee with nothing added.
Okay.
Pure.
And are you a coffee addict, or is there something better that they could bring for you?
No, coffee is my thing. I need one to begin my day.
Okay.
Good.
It has been an absolute pleasure having you on the podcast. You were a terrific guest. And I hope we could have you back soon.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I think it's really amazing, all the stuff that our students do, including podcasts like this. I mean, it really is quite incredible. And you add so much to the sense of community here by doing things like this. So thank you, guys.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
That's awesome. Yeah.
Thanks.
Terrific.